Throughout the war in Ukraine, Russia has twisted the truth and fashioned the narrative to paint a false picture of the conflict. Using lies and propaganda, its leading figures like President Vladimir Putin have told the world that Russia is charting a path towards some sort of glorious victory, crushing any and all opposition in its way. But those war lies just imploded, and now the truth is out. Leaked intel from official Russian sources has exposed the brutal truth of the country's catastrophic casualty rate, and the figures are even worse than expected. Of course, it's been evident that the war was going badly for Russia. There are countless official sources and statistics to back this up, like the list of visually verified Russian losses in Ukraine from the open source intelligence collective Oryx, which is frequently updated and details the extraordinary amounts of military equipment Russia has lost so far, like over 4,190 tanks, more than 8,400 armored and infantry fighting vehicles, and around 350 surface-to-air missile systems, to name but a few examples. Russia's shocking number of casualties is also well documented. In June of this year, the British Ministry of Defence was one of several official entities to state that Russia had likely passed the grim milestone of more than 1 million troops either killed or wounded in battle, with estimates suggesting that around a quarter of that figure, 250,000 people, were dead. That makes this the most costly conflict that Russia has been involved in since the Second World War, and 2025 has, by all accounts, been a particularly devastating year. In that same June update, the British MOD stated that Russia had likely suffered 200,000 losses already since the start of the year, with a daily average of 1,250 casualties per day. As the end of 2025 approaches, there's no telling how many more lives have been lost as Russian commanders persist with their reckless and wasteful tactics, throwing soldiers into the meat grinder in the desperate hope that their numerical superiority will eventually pay off. At the same time, a lot of the numbers and statistics reported about the Russia-Ukraine war come from either Western sources, like the British MOD or United States-based researchers, or from Ukraine itself. Russia, meanwhile, tends to keep this sort of data under wraps. It doesn't make any big announcements on its state-backed TV channels about how many of its people have been killed or wounded. It does, however, keep records, and some of those records just leaked. For the first time in the war so far, internal Russian records about military losses in 2025 have become available. The documents were obtained and shared by the Ukrainian project Hochu Zit, which translates to I Want to Live. I Want to Live is an initiative operated by Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR. It's designed to help Russian soldiers who don't want to be involved in the conflict surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces safely. It began back in 2022, several months into the war, and by January 2024, the service had reportedly received over 26,000 phone calls, plus more than 48 million visits to its website. There are no details about how the I Want to Live team was able to obtain these leaked Russian documents, and it's likely they don't wish to share any information about any leakers or moles within the Russian ranks. They did, however, post photos of the documents in question on X for all to see. Those documents show a large spreadsheet-style table with various columns and figures. At the top of the page, the main header explains that the figures below detail overall losses for the Russian military from the period of January 1st to September 1st, 2025. And the various column headers represent different types of losses, including deaths, injuries, soldiers who are missing in action, and soldiers who have been taken captive by the enemy, as well as a section on the right covering equipment losses. I Want to Live posted a lengthy thread detailing everything that could be learned from the table, beginning with the following. For the first time, we are publishing Russian statistics on losses in the Russian armed forces in 2025. We've obtained data on Russian army losses for the first 8 months of 2025, and the numbers are staggering. In 243 days, Russia lost 281,550 men killed, wounded, and missing. Over 280,000 casualties in the span of just 8 months. It's an astonishing figure, and one that tells the true story of how disastrous this war has been from the Russian perspective. Ukraine, of course, has lost countless people too, including innumerable civilians killed in Russia's reckless drone and missile bombardments. But Russia, as the larger invading force with all of its enormous defense spending and vast stocks of tanks, armored vehicles, missiles and more, should never have lost so many people for such small gains. The The numbers are shameful for the Kremlin's commanders and demonstrate just how reckless and stubborn they've been in persisting with tactics that treat human lives as nothing but cannon fodder. Time and time again, reports have shown Russian soldiers being essentially thrust into battle along the front lines with inadequate training, bare-bones equipment, and almost no armor or artillery support to assist them. It's no wonder that so many have died, and so little land has been captured. Yet still the Kremlin refuses to adjust its strategy, simply recruiting more and more men to send to their deaths and replace those that came before them. The second I Want to Live post goes into more detail, explaining exactly how that figure of 281,550 casualties breaks down, while also noting the enormous amount of military equipment Russia has lost as well. 86,744 dead, including 1,583 officers and 8,633 prisoners, 33,966 missing, including 11,427 prisoners, 158,529 wounded, including 6,356 officers and 16,489 prisoners, 2,311 captured. The loss of military equipment amounts to 13,145 units, which are irretrievable, and 48,458 units can be restored. Looking closer at those numbers, deaths account for close to a third of the full quota of casualties. This demonstrates how dangerous and deadly the front lines are for those on both sides, with drones constantly buzzing in the air and artillery fire raining down from above, plus large concentrations of troops on the ground, ready to fire at any enemy forces that enter the sites. Chances of survival are slim to none. It also shows how ineffective Russia is when it comes to evacuating wounded soldiers from the battlefield. Its commanders are either incompetent in this area or simply don't care enough about saving people's lives, as one of the later posts in the I Want to Live thread notes. The casualty ratio is telling. Due to the lack of a proper system for evacuating the wounded from the battlefield, there are only 1.3 wounded soldiers for every one killed. This demonstrates the low survival rate of the wounded, who are usually abandoned without assistance after being wounded. As far as the equipment numbers are concerned, these too show the shocking cost of the Kremlin's war effort. Even though Russian officials seem to believe they can restore the vast majority of damaged tanks, vehicles, and other pieces of equipment, they still admit to more than 13,000 total losses, representing billions upon billions of dollars worth of military hardware. And while the Russian data doesn't go into depth about which specific types of equipment are included in those losses, it's known from open source intelligence analysts that Ukraine has successfully taken out huge number of tanks, artillery systems, radars, air defenses, aircraft, naval vessels, infantry fighting vehicles, and other crucial cogs of the Kremlin war machine, weakening Russia's offensive capabilities one strike at a time. The I Want to Live thread continues, detailing how many losses Russia has suffered per month on average. Average monthly losses are 35,193 people and 7,700 units of equipment, of which 1,643 units are irretrievable. Every day, the Russian army loses an average of 1 battalion, killed or missing, 496 men. Every month, the entire 7th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces is lost. These numbers further illustrate just how big Russia's losses are, with close to 500 soldiers killed, wounded, or lost in battle on a daily basis. It's an utterly unsustainable figure. For now, Russia has somehow been able to keep on recruiting tens of thousands of new troops per month. It's managed this via various methods, including offering big cash incentives to desperate people who are often struggling to find work and simply want an easy way to support and feed their families, as well as recruiting convicted killers, rapists, and other criminals, sending them straight from their jail cells to the front lines to bolster the Russian ranks. Russia has also exploited migrants, piling pressure on Central Asian communities from countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, often threatening them with deportation or imprisonment unless they agree to enlist. This too was uncovered by the I Want to Live initiative in a grim report published earlier this year, which showed how many of these people, who originally worked as street sweepers and construction workers, were strong-armed into the army and dispatched to their deaths in Ukraine. On top of all of that, earlier this year, lawmakers also introduced a bill that would allow for year-round conscription. This would replace Russia's pre-existing biannual draft system, giving the military the power to call up new troops from the general population more or less whenever it wants. Thanks to all these changes, the Kremlin continues to top up its numbers of active duty personnel, which goes some way to counteracting its massive losses. Indeed, a recent report from Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence revealed that Russia had called up approximately 280,000 new military personnel since the start of 2025, with Vadim Skibitsky, deputy head of the GUR, stating in a September 7 interview with Ukrinform, "According to our data, as of September 1st, 2025, the Kremlin has called up about 280,000 military personnel under contract." That's almost the exact same amount as the total number of casualties in the same period, which shows how effectively Russia has been able to replace people who have been injured, killed, or captured by Ukraine. GUR sources also report that the Kremlin hopes to enlist 343,000 people by the end of the year. It's on track to reach or even exceed that target, so long as it maintains its current recruitment rates, as it's currently gaining around 35,000 new soldiers monthly. As Skibitsky notes, so there are all signs that they will fully fulfill their recruiting plan by the end of the year. But this cannot last forever. Russia doesn't have some sort of infinite supply of able-bodied people who are willing to take up arms and put their lives on the line in Ukraine. Nor does it have an infinite amount of money and resources to keep on funding its expensive recruitment drives and maintaining its increasingly costly war effort. What's more, the cost of every new soldier is rising, as detailed in a recent report by Dr. Janis Kluger on the Russianomics blog. Dr. Kluger is an expert in economic development and trade in Eastern Europe and Eurasia, and has written extensively about the financial side of the Russia-Ukraine war. In a September 5 post, Kluger wrote, "If we only consider regional and federal sign-on bonuses, the average cost to recruit a contract soldier has increased from 1.5 million rubles in January 2025 to approximately 2 million rubles today. By the end of 2025, the cost per soldier will likely rise to 2.5 million rubles." He went on to explain exactly what this means for the Russian economy. At 2 million rubles per soldier, signing 35,000 soldiers would cost 70 billion rubles, 840 billion rubles per year, or 0.4% of GDP. At 2.5 million per soldier, the cost of recruitment would increase to 0.5% of GDP. Of course, this is not the full picture because federal and regional bonuses only account for a portion of recruitment costs and a small percentage of total personnel costs, including soldiers' pay, compensation, and pensions. In other words, it's only going to become more expensive for Russia to recruit new troops to replace the ones it lost the month before, and Russia's economic prospects look incredibly grim at the moment, with multiple economists both outside and within the country predicting a major recession on the horizon, plus a serious labour shortage too. Even Putin has been forced to concede defeat in this sector, pledging to cut defense spending in 2026 slightly below 2025 levels, according to Russia's draft budget, to help his country avoid more economic turmoil. But the facts of the matter are clear to see. Even if Russia's defense budget decreases, it cannot afford to keep this conflict going on for years and years to come, especially not when Ukraine continues to launch such effective, devastating attacks on its infrastructure. Indeed, Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries, pipelines, and fuel depots are largely responsible for the massive fuel crisis currently spreading far and wide across Russia's regions, with gas stations forced to shut down and long lines of motorists waiting hours on end just to buy a tank full of gas at record high prices. The longer the war goes on, the more expensive it's going to get for Russia, and at some stage, recruitment will inevitably suffer. The Kremlin won't be able to call up enough people to counteract its losses, and slowly but surely, the Russian army will begin to crumble. What's more, one of the most worrying things about this new leaked Russian data is that even with massive recruitment and a much larger force than Ukraine, the Kremlin still isn't able to achieve its targets on the ground. The next I Want to Live post compares the current situation to the Soviet army during World War II. This is comparable to the USSR's losses during the East Prussian offensive, when 126,000 soldiers died, but the Soviets captured northern Poland and all of Prussia, including the Königsberg fortress. Modern Russian generals lost 120,000 men, but are unable to capture Pokrovsk. It's a damning statement, but absolutely true. The Russian army has been rightfully feared throughout history because of its size, and especially after what the Soviets accomplished during World War II. The Union famously went on into the post-war period to solidify and strengthen its forces, amassing one of the largest stocks of tanks and armor in the world during the Cold War era, and leading the way in military development and innovation, producing pioneering vehicles like the BMP. So, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, so many military experts and analysts predicted a swift victory for the Kremlin's forces. They had the larger army and far greater numbers of resources after all. But it hasn't panned out that way, in the slightest. While Russia has enjoyed some success here and there, it spent close to 4 years now fighting in Ukraine and today controls only slightly more territory than it did in March 2023, with gains that remain limited relative to the overall cost of the war. What's more, in key areas like the Pokrovsk sector of Donetsk, as the I Want to Live post notes, Russia has been utterly unable to advance. It's tried for months to capture a single city, amassing a massive force and deploying every tactic in its playbook, from using drones to tanks and even disguising its military members as civilians in order to sneak them into Pokrovsk to disrupt the city from within. Nothing has worked. Even with more than 100,000 troops in the area, Russia still cannot find a way to break through Ukraine's defensive lines. Instead, it aimlessly throws more and more troops and other weapons towards Pokrovsk, suffering one loss after another. The I Want to Live X thread also included some details about specific units and battalions that have seen the biggest losses. The leader in losses is the Center Group of Forces, consisting of the 2nd and 51st Combined Arms Armies. The 2nd OA, under the command of Ramil Ibatulin, and the most meaty units that were part of it, the 27th Motorized Rifle Division, the 15th and 30th Motorized Rifle Brigades, lost 15,310 people irretrievably and 16,260 wounded. The 51st Army, which included the equally notorious meat units, the 1st, 5th, 114th, 132nd, 110th and 9th Motorized Rifle Brigades, managed to inflict 13,000 casualties and 14,201 wounded. The 51st Army suffered the heaviest losses of equipment, 1,642 units. The 1st Tank Army, as part of the West Group of Forces, is suffering no less staggering losses, 9,987 irretrievably lost and 11,411 wounded. Elite Russian units, which the Russian Armed Forces Command is trying to protect, lost 2,272 paratroopers killed and missing and 3,191 wounded. As the numbers show, certain Russian forces have suffered much more heavily than others, and it's likely that morale among the remaining troops is exceptionally low. Having seen so many of their brothers in arms fall in battle, those left behind are forced to ask the question, will I be the next to die? This in turn could lead to more soldiers from these units and forces surrendering, deserting, or doing whatever else they can to escape the conflict with their lives. There have already been reports earlier this year of some Russian soldiers shooting themselves and each other in places like the feet in order to be medically evacuated from the front lines and live to see their families once more. This is only going to become a more popular tactic as the losses continue to mount up and Russian troops get a better understanding of the grim realities of their situation. The X thread from I Want to Live sums up with the following message to the Russian population. Russians need to be mentally prepared for the fact that when the war ends, they may be told the real number of dead, missing and wounded. Since the beginning of the invasion, this number has exceeded 1 million. This is the price of Putin's rule and his support among the Russian people. This is the cold hard truth of this war, and it's something that even Putin can no longer hide from his people. Now, learn more about Russia's staggering losses in our recent video, which looks at how Putin's forces are set to run out of tanks, artillery and manpower in 2026. Alternatively, check out this video to see how Ukraine's forces just launched one of their biggest revenge attacks of the war so far, bombarding sites in Crimea and Russia and leaving the Kremlin with a number of serious fires to put out and yet more costly problems to solve. And finally, be sure to subscribe to our channel too, so you can be among the first in the world to find out about the latest major developments from the front lines of Ukraine.